Well, we're going back to France, in case you've been there with us before. And we're going to a different part, a department called Alsace. People often used to talk about it as if it were Alsace-Lorraine, one area, one word. It isn't. These are two departments of France that have bounced back and forth between Germany and France because of provisions following, depending on which war we're talking about. They are now firmly ensconced in France, and Alsace is a simply magic part of the country. You'll hear me talk about 13th century and 16th century as if they were yesterday. They weren't, but there are still structures standing, houses and churches and cathedrals, but that's not all there is. Those wonderful half-timber houses and soaring cathedrals. There's real people, real food, really beautiful rivers, the eel, not like E-E-L, but I-L-E. River is an important part of the area, and other rivers too, and you'll see them, and you'll get a flavor of the flowers and the little bit of the people, but certainly the buildings. Come along with us. I think you'll enjoy yourself. As I said, it makes 7 centuries ago seem like yesterday. This is the beautiful city of Strasbourg in Alsace, northeast France, a corner of France that has bounced back and forth between Germany and France, but now the people here are very, very French. But the architecture is fascinating. You can see the old architecture, which has a touch of both. And to explain it to us, I'm standing in Place Corbeau, by the way, a very old part of the city. I'd like to introduce you to our guide, Mary, who will just say hello to you.
Thank you.
This is going to be heard in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania.
Oh, I am. Yes. Good morning. Thank you.
And you're going to tell us a little bit about the cathedral and all the wonderful things.
Yes. We shall discover this town. This is a very old town. 2,000 years of history. 2,000 years. Yes. It's very unusual.
Very unusual and very beautiful. Thank you so much. Now we'll go take a walk. This is a 16th century building that was a hotel, and very many important people stayed here, including the brother of Marie Antoinette, who went back, and he was the emperor of some part of Germany, and he went back and forth to Paris to try to convince her not to play cards and behave in such a reckless way. In any event, he stayed here, and this is in the process of being refurbished, the entire building. They're talking about whether to turn it back into a hotel or to make a museum out of it. I don't know which way I'd vote, but it's fascinating and very typical of the architecture of the period. Now, there are many, many churches in town, as you can imagine, and other lovely buildings. What is this one over here? This charming building, it was a slaughterhouse from the days of the Middle Ages. And these tiny little windows were used for ventilation. You see the water table is very high because the river eel runs right through the town, and they couldn't store anything in the basement. So, well, we'll go take a look at the river eel, and you'll hear a good story about that, too. As you can see, it's a little bit chilly here today, but we have to stop here along the river Eel, very famous river, and see this bridge, which in the Middle Ages was used for torture. They used to torture people who killed their parents or their babies, or even worse, if you want the truth, the terrible thing they did that they were tortured for is watering their wine and selling it as whole wine. They used to put them in a heavy metal box and dunk them in the river till they were about to drown, and they'd pull them up and put them back again. In any event, you get the picture. It's not a pretty one, but the bridge sure is pretty. Behind it is the customs house. People would come from, and goods would come from other parts of the country, and perhaps from Germany as well, I don't know. And maybe it belonged to Germany at the time, whatever. As I said, this bounced back and forth, and they used to collect the taxes for the goods that were coming in through on the River Eel. There are many little tiny touristy kinds of restaurants. Thought you'd like to see maybe what they serve, and this is the foie gras of goose, and that's about $18. And the spätzle, little dumplings with cheese and a green salad, is about $9. Raviolis with meat and spinach, and choucroute, which is the very famous dish of Alsace, is here. And you see how charmingly they display all this. The name of the restaurant is the Gruber. And one of the things I'd like to point out is that the people in the Middle Ages, when these 16th century houses were built, were taxed on the size of the ground floor. And then they would add other overhangs, and they were not charged as much for the overhangs as they would if it were all on the ground. This is the Cathedral of Strasbourg, and until the 19th century, the highest spire in the world. Gothic, obviously. It was started in the 12th century and took 300 years to build. The detail is incredible, and you'll see more of it in just a minute, but it's one of the most magnificent buildings in the world. Usually, Eve is the one who's blamed for the fall from grace. But in this cathedral, it is shown as the man who is the tempter. And right next to him is a woman who is being tempted, and she's sort of out of her clothes. I didn't know they had clothes in the days of Adam and Eve, but what the heck? Everybody takes, if not poetic license, artistic license with the kind of artwork they do. And it is magnificent here in Strasbourg. And here, standing in the cathedral square, of course, as you might anticipate, many of the very, very old buildings, 16th century, these buildings that are decorated with the timbers, and the wonderful, wonderful roofs of heavy, heavy slate. But as you see, the cathedral is just surrounded by them. They're all over this square. And that is a 15th century organ. Look at the detail, the work. And I don't know whether you can see the stained glass windows alongside. They say they have more stained glass windows in square footage, I guess, than any other cathedral in France. Simply gorgeous. Ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is an astronomical clock, and the young man up there walks around and somebody else rings a bell. It's a fascinating 16th century clock when Copernicus said the sun was the center of the solar system, and this is to illustrate that. And people come from miles and miles around just to see the clock in action. This is the altar of the cathedral, and this is one of the first things that was built. It is 12th century. You see how there's no perspective in the artwork, but Oh, it's so beautiful. And this 14th century rose window is one of the prides, absolute pride of the cathedral. And it is due to an American soldier who was able to rescue the pieces of the stained glass. It's a long story, but it's worth hearing. The French were so concerned about their beautiful stained glass, they took the windows apart and put them in a salt mine. And after the war, nobody remembered where they were. It was an American soldier who found it and brought them back to Strasbourg. And he is, believe me, a hero in this town. And just in the shadow of the cathedral is this absolutely charming little alley, I guess I will say, a walkway for tiny cafes and places where people, today it's not going to be so terribly nice to sit outside and have a meal, but in nice weather it would be. And even though these were built in the 16th century, people had a great sense of individualism. And you can see there's all these, even though they put these half timbers on the houses, so many different styles and colors. It's just breathtakingly beautiful. And this is Hansbach. We've just stopped by the side of the road. This is registered as one of the prettiest towns in France. 17th century. All these half-timbered houses. Good grief, you're going to say, don't they have anything modern in Alsace? Yes, they do, but this is what's so Hansel and Gretel charming about the area. The surf is, they obviously have game. You can see from the sign. They often have on the sign whatever the specialty is. If it's a butcher or a baker, they'll show. And here they serve game. We are at the Moulin on the Welk. The Welk is the river, the Moulin is a mill, and we'll show you the mill after a while. But right now we're going in this charming little inn and have lunch. I wonder if it says charming inside the restaurant as it is here. Let's go see. And to welcome us here at the Moulin, the restaurant, is Madame Yvette
Schmidt, c'est ça, oui.
Propriétaire.
Propriétaire, oui.
She owns the restaurant and runs it, and every single detail of what I see is simply beautiful.
Thank you very much.
And this is what they use for heat instead of a radiator. It is a radiator, but look at it, made out of these beautiful tiles. And lovely dining room, and let's go see what's happening in here. Is this where you have it set up? And this is all set up for us with an Alsatian appetizer. I want you to see the glasses. They're very typical of Alsace with the green stems. And this is white wine and a little currant liqueur, cassis. And it's very typical of what people drink all over France, but this is Alsace, and they do it their way. And in case you wonder why the restaurant was called the Mill on the Welk, well, this is the Welk, this is the river, and that's the mill. I guess they must have made something with this rushing water at some time. But right now, it just looks like there's a young man in there, over there. We didn't pose him there, but he's fishing for trout or tweet salmonet, the salmon trout, whatever lives in this river. We just had lovely, lovely salmon. We're looking at the oldest building in Wissembourg, a beautiful town on the banks of the Lauter River. And this oldest tower is 11th century, imagine, still standing. I don't think I'd be standing if I were around since the 11th century. I have a hard enough time as it is. And then that was a defense tower as well as a place of worship for the monks. and the rest of the building was torn down, and the sandstone, very unusual, in two shades, both the rosé sandstone and the yellow sandstone, was added about the 13th century, along with the Tower of Gothic design, great deal later, a couple of hundred years. But you see how the style of the church has changed. And these were monks of a kind who came from Ireland, of an order that had Christianized much of Europe, and they settled here and were exempt from taxes and so forth. So it was a very, very wealthy order. And it's a real landmark here in Wiesenburg. Beautiful, beautiful town. Well, we're in the town of Obernai, in the shadow of the Vosges Mountains. Very beautiful country, along the wine route. This is where some of the great Alsatian wines come from. And although they're bottled in long, narrow neck bottles, so they look like German wines, they're very much, they have a lot more acid and complexity. In any event, we've been enjoying them, and we'll go to a tasting later today. As you can see, it's no matter which way you turn in this town, it's picturesque and really one of the prettiest places that we've been to. Strasbourg is bigger, and I hope we'll hit Colmar, but Obernai is really very, very special. The architecture is just beautiful in every direction. Standing here in Bar, which is a town of about 6,000, not far from Obernai, not far from Ottrott. They're all very clustered here on the edge of the Vosges Mountains. And here we're standing at the foot of, you will not believe this, it is Kirchberg, which means Cherry Hill. So when we look across the river now in from Philadelphia, we can talk about over there is Kirchberg. And here there are 6 major wineries. At the time of the French Revolution, there were 100, but they were very tiny. And this is where the premier cru, the best wines of all of Alsace, are grown on this wonderful hill. And we have a beautiful day to see this. The sky is blue, a few little tiny wispy clouds, and it is simply beautiful here. The town is old. It has all these little houses with the half timbers, some of them very, very old, some of the oldest in the area, as a matter of fact. But we're lucky to be here on such a gorgeous day. We're now in the town, or city, I should say, of Colmar, C-O-L-M-A-R, which is 65,000 people. It's a very old city, as you see and some new. You see the half-timbered houses, so it's been around for a while. It was liberated during World War II by the Americans. And as a matter of fact, the Statue of Liberty was designed by a man from Colmar. So there's a lot of connection between the Americans and this part of Alsace, this part of France. This is called Little Venice. It was named Little Venice by the Prussians, who thought it was sort of south of where many of them were, and found it very picturesque, as it is today. Absolutely beautiful. People walk along the river here. They take boat rides along the river. What river is this, I wonder? The river. The Lauch, okay. And you can see half-timbered houses again for a change. but it's the way it's all reflected in the water. It's too bad the weather is so crummy standing here under an umbrella, but maybe it'll get better. And this old wall that you're seeing just opposite us is one of the original walls of the city, which was 13th century, I guess, is when they walled the city and Colmar became a city. Actually, it was founded about 900, but it didn't become a city until there were walls around it and had a few other amenities. This is where one wants to come if you want to get the full atmosphere of Colmar. This building is from the 13th century, and it's 100 years older than the oldest house in Paris. I think that's quite fascinating. And it's Sunday morning, and I'm in competition with the church bells, the cathedral bells. You see what fascinating colors of the sandstone here. This cathedral is so big that it was the only church that they needed in Colmar until, I don't know, 100 years ago or so. City Hall, 16th century. Well, I neglected to mention the City Hall of Munster. The Munster cheese here is a very strong cheese. It's not like that wimpy stuff that we have at home. It's very well aged and it's delicious. And now we've been talking about storks, and they have souvenir storks everywhere. Storks are in the Alsace thought to bring good luck. Well, babies too, but good luck especially. And on top of this old wonderful building, there are 3 storks' nests and 2 storks in them. At least 2 is what I can see. So these are the first live ones we've seen. It's kind of exciting. They're so enamored of storks here that they even named the hotel for storks. That's what it means in French. And here's a place that specializes in Munster cheese. I think I'll go in and have some. Here's another wine town, Roving, 16th century. And as you can see, it's full of tourists because this is on the Route des Vins, the route of wine. Oh, there's a guy, for some reason, blowing his horn. And baby storks. Although we haven't seen any storks here except in Munster, they sell them everywhere. So if you want babies and good luck, I guess you better come here. Oh, he's saying, welcome to Alsace. And any place that's worth its salt has to have a castle. This one looks pretty well preserved. It's 14th century, I think. Maybe 15th. But wow, nifty shape. We're in Kaiserberg, very old, very picturesque, very cold, very gloomy today, and we're not walking around town and getting frozen. I've already done enough of that, but we couldn't pass the castle by. 13th century, very, very pretty, probably the prettiest one we've seen. So you get a peek at it and know that it's on the outskirts of Kaiserberg, a very old and picturesque town. I hope you enjoyed Alsace. We did. We had a wonderful time. We tooled along tiny roads and along some superhighways too. But it's much more fun to be off the superhighways and on the little roads that connect the little towns and a couple of big cities. Well, big is relative term, but it's a part of France that I know you'd enjoy, and I hope you'll follow us to other parts of France and other parts of the world. This is Barbara Ann Rosenberg, your roving reporter, leaving Alsace.